Hello everyone, and good evening, and a warm welcome to this webinar. So we are Medgenome, the leaders in genetic testing in India, and my name is Joseph Victor. This webinar is part of a webinar series on essentials of genetics in the 21st century. And the first part in this is the basics of genetics, part one by Dr. Sheetal Shavda, senior consultant, clinical geneticist at Medgenome Labs India. Before we start, I wanted to thank Dr. Narayan Saha for providing us this opportunity to present to this August audience. And we definitely look forward to more interactions with you all. Before I hand over to Dr. Saha, I wanted to inform the audience that if you have any questions or comments, you can type it in the Q&A window of the Zoom webinar interface, and we will address it to Dr. Sheetal at the end of her talk. And we will also be sending out a recording of this webinar. So in case you missed out anything, any points, or you want to revisit any points, you can always come back and look at the video recording. So we'll do that sometime next week. And so without any further delay, I will now hand over to Dr. Saha, who will introduce the rest of the dignitaries and also our speaker for the night. So, and I will also, once the talk starts, I will mute everybody so that there's no crosstalk. So once the talk is over, I'll unmute all of you.
Good evening to everybody. Bangladesh Society of Medical Genetics cordially welcome you all to today's webinar on medical genetics. This is Dr. Narayan Saha, Secretary, Bangladesh Society of Medical Genetics, is welcoming you all to today's webinar on medical genetics. My respected teachers, learned audience, and dear colleagues, good evening and adab to all of you. We have amongst us as chairperson Professor Shohidullah sir, and as chief guest Professor Monjur Hussain sir, and as a special guest Professor Dr. Muhammad Jahid Hussain. Actually, all of you are very much aware that the Bangladesh Society of Medical Genetics has to postpone its scheduled international webinar on medical genetics, which was scheduled to be held on 28th and 29th March 2020 due to the prevailing COVID pandemic situations. Definitely in near future, we will reorganize it in collaboration with the Medgenome once the COVID situation improves. Meanwhile, as part of the continuing medical education, we have taken an opportunity for you to arrange webinar series on medical genetics. Actually, we have 4 webinars. Today is the Bangladesh Society of Medical Genetics is organizing it in partnership with our different societies. Today's webinar is in partnership with the Bangladesh Pediatric Association, and our subsequent webinars will be in partnership with the Obstetrics and Gynecological Society of Bangladesh. The third one will be with the Bangladesh Perinatal Society on 2nd October 2020, and the last and 4th webinar will be in partnership with the Neonatal Forum on 16th November 2020. Now this is the time for speech of the chief guest. Our Monjur Hussain sir, he is the president of Bangladesh Pediatric Association. He is also the president of Bangladesh Society of Pediatric Infectious Disease, and he is also the president of Bangladesh Pediatric Cardiac Society of Bangladesh, and sir was also the former professor and director of Dhaka Shishu Hospital. Actually, Monjur Hussain sir is very well known to us for his outstanding academic activities and organizational capacities. May I request Professor Monjur Hussain sir to deliver his speech as chief guest. Mr. Joseph, please open the audio of Monjur Hussain sir, please. Yes, Monjur Hussain sir, please.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Shah. I'm very much delighted, and it's my proud privilege to be here today to have the opportunity to participate in the first webinar of medical genetics, where there will be talk on basic genetics. For me, and I think most of the participants will agree with me, that this is a very important aspects in pediatrics in terms of genetic diseases. Unless you know the basics of genetics, it will be very difficult to evaluate the genetic problems in pediatrics, number one. And number two, it will be a change of taste in this pandemic session, because we have having a lot of series of webinar of COVID-19 only. So there will be change of taste for us all. So I must express my thanks, and on behalf of BPA, to the organizer, especially Professor Shahidullah and Professor Narayan Saha, for these important aspects of medical genetics to be discussed today. And I also thank Dr. Shitol, who is very well known, and she will deliver the important topic. And without wasting much time, I wish all the success of this important webinar. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Joseph, Joseph, am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible. Please go ahead. Your video is also clear.
Okay. Okay. May I call upon Professor Dr. Muhammad Jahid Hussain, who is the Secretary of Bangladesh Pediatric Association and the Pro Vice Chancellor of Bangladesh Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujib Medical University. He is also the Chairman of Department of Pediatric Cardiology, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujib Medical University, and Secretary Pediatric Cardiac Society of Bangladesh. Actually, Professor Dr. Jahid Hussain is very popular amongst the pediatricians for his organizational capacities and amicable behavior. May I request him to make a short, brief speech as a special guest. Professor Jahid Hussain, please.
Thank you, Professor Narayan Chandra Saha, for inviting me as a special guest in this important international webinar on genetics organized by Bangladesh Society of Medical Genetics. The president of today's webinar on medical genetics, Professor Muhammad Shahidullah, who is a very dynamic, very popular, and very I can say that he's a legendary neonatologist as well as pediatrician of Bangladesh, Professor Shahidullah. Our chief guest of today's webinar on medical genetics, Professor Manzoor Hussain. Professor Narayan Chandra Saha, I've already told, he's a very dynamic person. He's the president of Bangladesh Pediatric Association, president of Pediatric Cardiac Society of Bangladesh, as well as Bangladesh Society for Pediatric Infectious Disease, Professor Manzoor Hussain, the lauded speakers, expert panels, dear participants. Assalamu alaikum. First of all, I want to felicitate and convey my thanks to Professor Muhammad Shahidullah and Professor Narayan Chandra Saha for forming such a important society. The Bangladesh Society of Medical Genetics. We know that today that genetics play a very important role in the genesis of many important diseases like familial disease, hereditary disease, inborn errors of metabolism, promotional abnormality. Also, genetics play a very vital role in the causation of cancer. So, I think Bangladesh, with the establishment of Bangladesh Society of Medical Genetics, and with just a few minutes back, I have attended a webinar on prevention of cervical cancer organized by Department of Gynecology, Bangladesh Sheikh Mujib Medical University. They are working for the screening of cervical cancer throughout the Bangladesh. So that is an important step for the prevention of cervical cancer. So it is important to know the genetic basis of diseases for diagnosis, prevention, as well as counseling of parents, and so that we can as well as we can prevent the genetic disease as well as we can treat the uh, genetic diseases in time, as well as we can counsel the parents about the future course of the disease, as well as the future action they are taken to treat the disease. So I will not take much. So I convey my sincere thanks to the organizer for arranging such an important webinar on medical genetics, as well as for inviting me as a special guest in this seminar. I wish this webinar very success of this webinar. Thank you all. Thank you. Okay, Professor Narayan.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Professor Jahid, for your excellent speech and address. Now, this is the time for speech of the chair. Joseph, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Please go
Narayan, you are
Okay.
audible.
Now, this is the time for speech of the chairperson, Professor Shohidullah sir. Actually, sir is very renowned amongst the pediatricians as a excellent academicians. He good organizer and his leadership quality. Professor Shohidullah sir is now the chairman of Department of Neonatology, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujib Medical University. He is the president of Bangladesh Society of Medical Genetics, and he is also the president of Bangladesh Medical and Dental Council. May I request Professor Shohidullah sir to deliver his speech as chairperson. Professor Shohidullah sir, please.
Thank you, Professor Naran. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. At the outset, I am very happy that a webinar, the first of the series of the 4 that we are organizing from Bangladesh Medical Society for Medical Genetics. Here today we have got our chief guest, Professor Manzoor Hussain. I must say a few words about him. He is again a great academician, a very senior pediatrician, had been a very successful director of Dhaka Shishu Hospital for a long time, my elder brother, and he's also a very good speaker as well. Professor Manzoor Hussain is not only leading as the president of Bangladesh Pediatric Association. You have all heard that he is also the president of another 2 societies. One is Bangladesh Pediatric Cardiac Society and Bangladesh Society of Pediatric Infectious Disease. I'm delighted and grateful to him that he has agreed to accept our invitation to join as the chief guest. And we have heard a very brief speech, but I think he made a very important point, that we deal with the normal pediatrics and other things, but seldom we think about genetics. And this is so crucial that in many unfolding of many disease and its inner pathology, genetics is important. And one very sweet comment he has made, that so far we have been holding seminar on a lot of COVID and para-COVID topics, which is important and which is timely needed. But then as a change of test, this is a different kind of webinar. Thank you, Professor Manzoor Hussain, for your very kind and sweet words. The special guest is my friend, long-time friend, Professor Muhammad Jahid Hussain, a person of high organizational capability. He is now the Secretary General of BPA, which is our parent organization. He's also the Pro-Vice Chancellor of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujib Medical University, Chairman, Department of Pediatric Cardiac Society. And he is, again, I'm grateful to him that he has accepted our invitation, and also he has made a very good comment about us. We have with us Professor Narayan Saha, Secretary General of Bangladesh Society for Medical Genetics, is really very active Secretary General, I would say. And lastly, but the most important, are all esteemed participants, my colleagues who have joined this webinar. Without your joining, your participation, this would not be successful. And I'm so happy. In the first 5 minutes, more than 100 participants joined. And as of now, I see 190 have joined. So thanks again to all my webinar colleagues that you have made us proud. And when Narayan Shah said that this is a neglected area, genetics, and he came to me suggesting that to open a society, and I acknowledge I didn't want because my load of my work, but then I accepted, and we are going through now. And I must thank particularly Sheetal Sharda, the very respected speaker today, and Medjanam for making it happen. And with that, I would say I welcome you everyone, and I bring close to my remarks. Thank you very much.
Now we are heading towards our most expected part of today's webinar, the scientific program. We have our eminent speaker, Dr. Sheetal Sharda. She is actually a pediatrician as well as the medical geneticist. Joseph, am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible. Please go ahead.
Okay. She is actually a pediatrician as well as a medical geneticist. She did her MD in pediatrics and DM in medical genetics from Sanjay Gandhi Postgraduate Institute of Medical Science, Lucknow. Actually, she is very much eminent in her field in the arena of medical genetics in India. And her previous positions were as worked as associate professor in the Department of Pediatrics, Genetic Unit, Postgraduate Institute of Medicine, Chandrikar, PGI Chandrikar. She also worked as in the capacity of senior research associated in the genetic unit of All India Institute of Medical Science, the premier academic institute in India, New Delhi. Presently, she is affiliated with as a member to the National Academy of Medical Science and the she is also a member of the genetic specialty chapter of Indian Academy of Pediatrics, and she is also a member of the Indian Society of Human Genetics. She has many national and international publications in her credit, and she has been awarded both nationally and internationally. And she has enormous activities and clinical fellowships in various parts of the aspects of the genetic disorders. Now, may I call upon the eminent speaker, Dr. Sheetal Sharda, to deliver his speech of the today's sessions. Dr. Sheetal Sharda, please.
Hello, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I'm really privileged to hear so much good about me from Dr. Saha. And I thank him for inviting me for this talk. And I must also praise his patience and perseverance because we have been trying to get together for the past 3 years to attend, organize a CME, and he had lots of inputs into how the scientific session should be. And the March 2020 CME was planned according to his scientific inputs. I'm really thankful to him for like literally having so much of perseverance that, okay, if we cannot have it in Bangladesh, let us do it as a webinar. I was a little skeptical, but he was very confident that it would be a success. And I am happy to see so many participants. So I welcome all the participants, and I give my regards to all the eminent guests today for giving me this opportunity. And as Sir has told, today we will be having a series of 4 webinars. Today would be the first one. And it would be really very basic. And I think the students will be more benefited by this talk. And I can see there are professor level people, but I'm not sure whether I will be able to speak much in expertise, because today I was told that I have to speak basics. So starting with the first part, we have many more. So if you have any questions or if any new topic you want to discuss, you can keep it in the Q&A section. And instead of 4, we can have 5 webinars if Sir permits, because there is lots and lots which needs to be known in genetics. And since it is a mixed audience, everybody's area of interest would be different. So I hope I will be able to do justice to this topic. So today, basically, I was told to speak on pedigree drawing and Mendelian modes of inheritance and simple case scenarios. I have not included many cases because when we take the molecular section, which is the part 4 of the series, there would be many interesting cases. So what is genetics? Basically, the study of genes and the inheritance of traits is known as genetics. So we should all understand the importance of a DNA, gene, chromosomes in humans, which together, if we consider, they would be the genome of a person. So we have the nucleus. The nucleus has 23 pairs of chromosomes, out of which 22 are autosomes, and there is 1 pair of sex chromosome. Then the cell nucleus, the chromosomes are the basic storage units. So the chromosomes have the genes, and the genes are made up of DNA. So when we want to know about genetics, we will have to know about the DNA, about the gene, the chromosome, and many more things, which all together gives us the information of the genetic makeup of a person. We also have to know the contribution of genetics in human diseases. We look at patients daily in and out. At one extreme, there could be simple environmental conditions like scurvy, and giving us medicine, vitamin C, it would be corrected. On the other extreme is a single gene disorder like Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And as you can see, I have put many of the genetic as well as complex disorders in between the spectrum. In spite of being genetic diseases, some diseases will manifest their severity being mild or severe based on the environmental input. So a child with mild hemophilia may never have a bleeding episode until and unless there is a trauma. But if it is a severe hemophilia, he can spontaneously have a bleeding. Similarly, the complex disorders, clubfoot, pyloric stenosis, they have a major genetic component, but environment also plays a very strong role. Hence, we have the whole spectrum of disorders in which there would be a genetic predisposition along with the environmental input. When we consider the genetic disorders, we possibly always tell that they are rare. But fortunately, the genetics is quite simple. They are unifactorial, but unfortunately, they have a high recurrence rate. In contrast to the environmental or the complex disorders, which are very common, but fortunately, they have a low recurrence rate. But genetics is very complex and difficult to explain how in the same family you have certain disorders with various phenotypes. But if we keep saying that genetic disorders are rare, they will always remain neglected. But we should understand the statistics that almost 11% of pediatric hospital admissions are for children with genetic disorders. 3 to 5% of the births result in congenital malformation, and 30 to 50% of post-neonatal deaths are due to congenital malformation. So this doesn't make it a rare disorder. If we take it together along with the adult inputs also, we can see almost 12% of the adult hospital admissions are for adult genetic disorders, and 50% of mental retardation, which can start from pediatric to adulthood, have a genetic basis. Cancers have inherited susceptibility, and many of the chronic disorders also have a genetic component. So we cannot say that genetic disorders are really rare. And we also know that genetic disorders are always disorders with a burden, because they may cause malformation, mental handicap, physical handicap. They are lethal disorders, and most importantly, they are familial conditions. And hence they are a burden to the person himself, the family, and the society as a whole. So there will be many situations which come to you where the parents or the family come to you, want to know that, is this a genetic disorder? What is the risk in my kid or in my next generation? So for this, to know whether it is a genetic disorder and whether it is an inherited genetic disorder, we have to go for a family history. Family history is a powerful tool and considered to be the best genetic test. Rather than doing any hi-fi investigation, sometimes a simple family history, if taken very well, will give you a diagnosis itself. So what questions we have to ask to understand whether you are dealing with an inherited genetic disorder are the successful generations affected? You have an affected person. So is the parent of the person affected also? Is there any consanguinity in the family? Are males and females both affected and equally affected, or there is a difference between that females are seemingly more affected, or there is a high chance of death in male? And then the most important is there a male to male transmission? Answers to these questions will often give us the mode of inheritance or what type of disorder you are looking into. But you have to be aware that in majority of the cases, there might not be any family history at all. And yet you have a person or a family with a genetic disorder, and they are at their wits' end to know that what happened. We have no history in 3 generations. How come my child has this disease? It cannot be genetic. There is a phase of denial that no, this cannot be genetics. We are totally normal, and so this cannot be a genetic disorder. So these cases also have to be kept in mind. So coming to the main topic, first part would be pedigree analysis, and after that I would be touching on the modes of inheritance. So what exactly is a pedigree? Pedigree is a French term for crane's foot. So this is a type of a crane found in France, which is known as gru. And as you can see, the feet, they have a typical configuration. And so the pedigree is probably compared to the foot of a crane, and hence it is known as a pedigree. The basic medical pedigree is a graphic depiction of how family members are biologically as well as legally related from one generation to another. So this is the simplest definition we can give for a pedigree, that it is a graphical representation of the family. So when you know the mode of inheritance, still if you draw a pedigree, it helps in identifying the individual at risk. It will help in predicting the risk of recurrence, and also it will help in making recommendations. For example, in cancer. So once you make a good pedigree and you know the family history, for each individual, you can predict a risk, and you have to give them that what test can be done to know. And moreover, when you draw a pedigree, it is very well interpretable by anybody in the world. So globally, if everybody uses the same symbols and you send the history across, there will be no confusion regarding the family history which you want to put forth. And sometimes when the mode of inheritance is not known, then also to establish the pattern of inheritance, it becomes important to draw a pedigree. So there are many symbols used, and I'll start right from the basics. So, and these are nomenclatures and by standardized task force. So you can go to these journals and you can get a printout. They're readily available PDFs for the most basic type of pedigree symbols which we use. So a very simple nuclear family unit can be represented by a male by a square, female by a circle, and they are connected by various relationship lines. So individuals can again be made to show in the pedigree as if you have seen the person personally. So you have examined a child, you can just draw a bar across it that you have personally examined this child. If the patient you know has been tested and he is a carrier for a chromosomal abnormality, you can shade the right side. If the patient is a carrier for autosomal recessive disorder, you can shade the right side, left side. And then you have a obligate carrier of X-linked recessive disorder, which you put a circle inside. So these are various symbols again for individuals. So you can see that this is a normal male, female, and this is an unknown sex, which we use for children with disorders of sexual differentiation or DSD, where they have ambiguous genitalia. And phenotypically, you cannot make out whether it is a male or female. And then you have an affected individual, which will be shaded by color of your choice. Sometimes we can even show 2 or more conditions in the same person with 2 different colors. The multiple individuals, you can just put in the number of individuals inside. So when you have a very big family, like 8 or 9 siblings, and only 2 are affected, those who are unaffected, you can have a common symbol that these 5 are not affected. Otherwise, it would go, beyond the limited margin you have. And then when a person has expired or deceased, you just put a cross across it. And for stillbirth, you can write the gestational age. Similarly, for pregnancy, the same way you can write the gestational age, or you can put the LMP, and you have to put a P in between. For proband, you have to put a P along with a arrow. For a consultant, you can just put an arrow. And then for first trimester abortion, for spontaneous abortion, you can have this triangle. And for termination of pregnancy, you have to have a cross across it. But in India, we cannot use these symbols because we have the PCPNDT Act where we cannot do a sex determination. And hence, we in India usually use only this symbol for any pregnancy, irrespective of the gestation age. And then there is relationship. So any relationship between a male and female or a mating will be a single line. If there is consanguinity, there will be a double line. And then if there is no relationship, it is crossed. Then biological parents known will be a continuous line, while a biologic parents not known will be a discontinuous line. So similarly, you have symbols for each and every situation which comes to you for OPD. So relationship lines, again, this is a line of descent from which the offsprings are there. Then individual line is of the person individually, and then we have the sibship or the sibling line. As you can see, every generation is being in one horizontal line. So this is the way how you can put a proband and a consultant. You are the consultant. So a person who is coming to you for counseling will be the consultant with a D, and a proband or affected person will be a P or a proband, and he will be colored. Sometimes the proband himself or herself can be the person who is coming for counseling. So you can put P/C. So he's a proband also, and he's a consultant also. So some things are mentioned to write, but it may not always be possible. But a person who is drawing the pedigree, the name and the date can be written on the left-hand corner. And then the proband's name and the resident, or if you know the caste or religion, can be mentioned. And if the pedigree needs to be continued after 1 year or so, when the patient comes again and another resident or another doctor is looking at the same pedigree, they can just add the name and the date and keep adding it with a different color of the pen or different mentioning of the same detail. So you need not draw that pedigree again and again. So representation of the individual, there are certain ideal situations which they have given that it is better to draw the male partner to the left. But depending on the situation, you can change the, if it becomes easier to draw the pedigree, you can always draw it to the right. It doesn't matter, but just for uniformity, you should draw it on the left. And the same generation should be on the same horizontal line. Siblings should be drawn in birth order, but if by mistake it doesn't happen, it's okay. You can just record the age below it. And then you have to indicate the generation by Roman numerals, while the person will be symbolized by the Arabic numerals. And so a pedigree can be represented, the individual can be represented by Roman and as well as the Arabic numerals. So for each individual also, it becomes easy if you write the pedigree number, you write the age, and you can also mention the disorder. So if the person has expired, what age he has expired. And you can also write the relevant health information if you want to write that this was due to like carcinoma or whatever. So you can mention it below the name. We can also include degree of relationship. So relationship is number of meiosis between two relatives in the pedigree. So first degree would be a person's parents, siblings, and children. So usually first degree marriages don't happen. They are known as incest. What we would get as when we draw a pedigree and we want to show consanguinity or something, then it would always could be a second degree relationship or a third degree relationship. And the question is how many generations you want to include. Usually, like minimum, if you want to draw, you can draw 3 generations. But when you have understood that there is a health problem which is going beyond 3, you can extend as far as possible. So you can see an example that there are almost 5 generations drawn here, and this is the person of interest, and it can be seen that the parents, the siblings, and the children are first degree for this lady. So this is 3, 5, and then their second degree means the grandparents, grandchildren are the second degree, and then you have the cousins who are third degree. If you see the consanguinity here, so this child or these kids can be even second degree related to this, but if they are going beyond, then they can also be the fourth degree relationship, the same fifth. So this is how the relationship tree will look when you draw it in a perfect horizontally generation wise, how they have depicted. And sometimes you may have to draw more. This is a perfect example that this family of Huntington's disease, almost 10,000 persons. So this is not for us, like this is obviously for research where people are interested in one family and then extended families are being tested and tested. But for us, it becomes easy for clinical if we have at least 3 degree relationship. And now, since artificial reproductive techniques are also coming up in a big way, in 2008, we have recommendations for them also. As you can see on the screen, you have the symbol for sperm donor, for ovum donor, for surrogacy, surrogate with an ovum donor, and a planned adoption. So this is when a biologically not related embryo is being transferred. So this is a uncut line. This is a cut line showing that there is no biological relationship between this and this person. So can it be made easier? So yes, we have computer softwares also for drawing pedigree. Some are paid, some are totally free. And as you can see, you can do a lot of things with this online apps or software. You can add as many members as you want. You can add as many disorders in the same person, and it can go on, and it looks aesthetically very good. So, but the thing is, it is useful for large research and pedigrees and all, or when you want to give a summary which should look good to the patient and all, and you have time, right? So you can add as many individuals, you can add as complex data as you want, and it is good because you can electronically store it and then you can send it to exchange the data. And then you can also update it at a later age. And more importantly, along with the photo, you also get a table form. So you can correlate it very well. The only thing is that in a clinical setting, when you want to draw a quick weight degree, these softwares are not very helpful. So this brings me to the end of the first part, that whether you have a software or app, it's always good to draw a pedigree. And once you finish the pedigree, it is always looks like, oh, it's a work of art. And it was very well written, almost like so many years ago by Carl Person, that a complete pedigree is a work of great labor. And in its finished form, it is frequently a work of art. So if I can have some questions. Okay, so somebody has asked me that why caste is to be mentioned. I will come to this later on when I'm discussing the modes of inheritance. It is not necessary. It is that sometimes some disorders like ethnicity is there, or you know that certain populations are more prone or more susceptible to certain disorders, or you know that there is inbreeding in those castes, then it becomes easy for us to understand, okay, they are from this Agarwal community, or they are from Jewish population, so these conditions can be more common, right? So for that, if you want to mention, it's okay, but sometimes people may not like, I can give example of India, that some people don't like to inform their caste, so we don't insist. It is just like ethnicity based, like for example, even G6PD or some mutations are more common in certain castes. So we can, accordingly, we can mention it or not mention. So it is not compulsory, but if it is benefited to if you're doing a project work, for example, if I'm doing my career training and there are certain variants to be checked in Agarwal community or caste, and then also we can keep them for a project. So please repeat the degree of relationship. Okay. So I will have to go back for that. Shahida, I can't understand. Also, consultant means what? So if you can just repeat the question. In the meantime, I can go back to the relationship. I'm not able to do it.
We request the audience to type out their question in the Q&A window.
I'm not able to go back here. Okay, I'll take it again later on. If you don't mind, we'll finish this off and I'll take all the questions together. Okay, so now coming on to modes of inheritance. I don't know why this has happened. Yeah, okay. So modes of inheritance becomes important because once you have your medical family tree, there could be certain things based on the modes of inheritance for which you can be tested. And so it becomes important to understand that what we are dealing with and how to set the risk of recurrence. So modes of inheritance are multiple. There could be Mendelian modes of inheritance, and then there is a whole set of non-Mendelian modes of inheritance. When we say Mendelian, significant for day-to-day clinical practice, I would consider that 4 are very important, which I will be discussing in detail. And in non-Mendelian, which is a part of the second part of this series next time, taken by Dr. Meenakshi, she will be touching upon all the non-Mendelian. And trust me, they are much more complicated. And I have got an easier job to explain to you about the Mendelian modes of inheritance. And we cannot move ahead without paying tribute to the father of genetics, Gregor Mendel, who has given us the wonderful experiments and the laws of heredity. So he has given 3 laws: the law of segregation, the law of independent assortment, and the law of dominance. So the law of segregation says that when the gametes are formed, now everybody has 2 sets of genes or chromosomes. So if there are 2 sets of chromosomes, 2 pairs, you will have 2 sets of alleles or genes. And when the gametes are formed and they are separated, so they will move independently. So each gamete will have 1 allele for each gene, right? And the law of independent assortment says that alleles of different genes will separate independently of one another. So there will be, during recombination or during making of the gametes, they will separate independently of each other. And then there is a law of dominance in which there are dominant and recessive traits. So dominant would be that even if one allele is mutated or changed, then the person will express. So the phenotype will be expressed even if the single allele out of the 2 are mutated or changed. So these 3 laws, based on this, the Mendelian inheritance patterns are based. And examples, as we all know, for autosomal dominant, autosomal recessive, these are the very common genetic disorders which we see in and out. So as soon as a person comes and you give a diagnosis, you know that this is an autosomal dominant condition. But sometimes there are disorders like congenital deafness or retinitis pigmentosa or spinocerebellar ataxia itself also, which can have autosomal dominant, autosomal recessive, as well as X-linked inheritance also. So when such a patient comes, it becomes difficult to explain to them the risk of recurrence and at the risk, who else would be at risk. So for such disorders, it becomes very important that without a genetic test, you will not be able to give them a risk of recurrence. But for the other disorders, it becomes easy to explain to them, okay, you are having a autosomal recessive disorder. So your siblings are at risk, your kids are at risk, and you have to do a testing. So it becomes important that at least for the common genetic disorder, you should know the modes of inheritance. So this is very basic information. I'm not going into much complex discussions regarding this. Autosomal dominant inheritance is basically vertical transmission. So if you see the pedigree here, you can see that every generation is getting affected. So this is a vertical transmission. All 3 generations, there are people who are getting affected, and males and females both are equally being affected. And every affected person has an affected parent, and even male to male transmission is there. And when it is a phenotypically not, it is like an ideal thing that whenever a person is phenotypically normal, he or she will not transmit the phenotype to the child. But you should also understand that even if there is no family history, there could be de novo mutations which can give rise to certain isolated cases in autosomal dominant disorder. So you have to be aware of these conditions, and again repeating the common autosomal dominant disorders. So once you know that it is autosomal dominant, it is not easy that you just say, okay, it is autosomal dominant, so risk of recurrence is 50%. There are certain exceptions, and rather than knowing the rules, it is more important to remember the exceptions when we are explaining or when we are counseling a family regarding the risk of recurrence, when we are doing a prenatal diagnosis or doing a carrier screening. So to understand these exceptions in autosomal dominant, one is lethal alleles. Alleles that prevent survival when they are homozygous or heterozygous are known as lethal alleles. So in an autosomal dominant disorder, if there is mating, then there is a chance that the child or the conceived product will have both the autosomal dominant alleles, and this is lethal. So if conception, the ratio is 1 will be affected, 2 will be having, 1 will be homozygous, 1 will be normal, and 2 will be having the disease. But at birth, you will see that the ratio doesn't remain the same because this is a lethal allele and is not survivable or not viable. So either it will end up in failed pregnancy, or it will not continue, or it will be a lethal thing and you can have a stillbirth. So at the birth ratio will be different from the conception ratio. So this is known as lethal alleles, which can change the genetic counseling or risk of recurrence. Second thing is codominance. Codominance is not very common in humans as much it is common in animals or plants, where both the heterozygous alleles are equally dominant. The most common example in humans is just the blood group. So when you have, now here we know that A is also dominant, B is also dominant over O allele. So even if one allele is O and one is A, the blood group will be A. So A is dominant over O. Similarly, B is dominant over O. But O if together, then the blood group will be O. But if a child gets A from the one parent and B, then it will be expressed as AB. So both, in spite of being autosomal dominant condition, both the alleles are equally manifesting. So there will be a combined phenotype. So the trait is neither dominant nor recessive. So this situation also needs to be kept in mind. Very important is penetrance. So penetrance is sometimes in autosomal dominant, they will give a history that the grandparent had it, but none from the second generation has it, but then the third or the grandchild is having a condition. So this is neither a vertical transmission nor a horizontal transmission. This is what is known as a skipped generation. So how can that be explained? So this can be explained by incomplete penetrance. So penetrance is the ratio of the number of persons with the disease manifestation to the number of persons with the mutation. So one of the person or the child does of this couple does have the mutation, but it is not expressed phenotypically. So he's just carrying the autosomal dominant allele, which he has passed on to his child, and he is getting the disease. So if one half of all the individuals who carry the allele manifest the disease, but the other half do not, then the penetrance is 50%. So many of the autosomal dominant have incomplete penetrance. So the parent, if you have the genetic test done and the child is having an autosomal dominant heterozygous variant, and you have to test the parents, they may have the mutation, but they will not express it. So that is known as incomplete penetrance, like BRCA1 or BRCA2, where the penetrance is 30 to 40%. So in spite of having the variant, lifelong the person may not have breast cancer, but they will take a decision because they have just inherited the gene, and it cannot be predicted beforehand whether they will have the disease or not have the disease. So they take the predictive testing and they take decisions accordingly. The second important point is variable expressivity. So when an phenotype in two members of the family, or even not related people, two different people having the same genotype, so they are having a condition like neurofibromatosis or something, and the expression will be so different in them that you cannot explain it by any other thing, that probably it could be some modifier gene working. Okay. So variable expressivity in the same family, you can have a person with just a bifid thumb. This will only be seen when you are doing an X-ray. And the other child or the parent might have a totally like a polydactyly or severe type of a bifid thumb. So this is known as same genotype but having variable expressivity due to either a gene-gene interaction or a gene environmental factors which we cannot predict. The other thing is pleiotropy. This again is important because there would be one gene which affects multiple systems, most common being tuberous sclerosis, neurofibromatosis. You can also have Wilson disease, but that is an autosomal recessive disorder. But I'm talking about autosomal dominant disorders also. As you all know, tuberous sclerosis can have many things. So it can involve the heart, it can involve the CNS, it can involve the skin, it can cause various types of cancers, right? So this is important because when we do a prenatal diagnosis and the fetus, or we just do an ultrasound and the fetus is having cardiorhabdomyoma, and we do a prenatal testing and it comes to be positive for TSC1, how do you explain to the parents? So they have to be tested. They may be having the same genotype, but if you check the parents retrogradely, one of them who is having the genotype might have cephalid spots only. They may just have a history of one seizure episode, right? Or they may then retrogradely give a sign that their previous child or somebody had a disorder. So it's always good to examine the parents retrogradely also. Now, what they will ask is, okay, the child has rhabdomyoma. Will it have anything else? So that again cannot be predicted if you do a CVS at 12 to 13 weeks, right? So you have to follow up the pregnancy. You can do a fetal MRI to see whether cortical tubers are there. But rest of the things, that how much mentally retarded the child will be, whether the child will have seizures or not, and whether the child will have cancers or not, cannot be predicted. So this is pleiotropy. So tuberous sclerosis is an example of pleiotropy where multiple systems are involved as well as variable expressivity. Both can be there in such conditions of autosomal dominant inheritance. So to know the risk of recurrence, what we use is known as a Punnett square, where we have the relationships of the gametes of the parents. So if this is an affected parent, the type of gametes formed would be gamete with the affected A allele and the unaffected A allele, and the normal parent has both normal alleles. And so seeing this, you can easily make out that there will be a 50% chance, irrespective of the gender of the child, that the risk is 50%. And these affected people, so this person who has a single allele which is affected is a heterozygous. So autosomal dominant will always present in a heterozygous condition. But when we do the counseling, we can just not say that it is 50% because, as I told again, incomplete penetrance, variable expression, anticipation, all these things have to be taken into account. Yes, when there is a sporadic condition, like there is no family history, the risk of recurrence in the siblings will be low, but we never say zero because we don't test for gonadal mosaicism. Now, this is another exception to all genetic disorders, that if you're suspecting something and you don't get an answer that how two siblings are affected when the parents are normal, then there is something which is known as gonadal mosaicism also. And then, as I have explained, there could be something which is known as a lethal gene. So when you counsel a patient for the next generation, we have to discuss all these things. I'm taking the example of achondroplasia. It is one of the very common skeletal dysplasias, easily diagnosable. So majority of the cases are sporadic. You may not find any family history. The parents are normal. They may even have one child who is totally normal. But when one child with this condition is born, they want to know the risk in the next child. So what we explain or what we counsel is, yes, the risk is small, but is not zero. So based on the empirical studies where there were two siblings with achondroplasia, the germline mosaicism empiric risk is 1 in 400. So based on this, prenatal diagnosis is warranted. So in this family, the proband was tested and the child was positive for the most common mutation in FGFR3, which is 1138G2A mutation. And the other most common is G2C. So 99% of the achondroplasiacs all over the world have just these two mutations. So this is I could say the only mutation which can cause achondroplasia. It is de novo sporadic all over, right? So based on this, the CVS was done for this family, which turned out to be negative. Second situation is that the proband or the person himself has achondroplasia. So here, this was the gentleman who was married for 6 years, but he was so afraid of having a baby because everybody kept saying you have it, so there is a 100% chance that your child is going to have it. And when we counsel that based on this condition, being an autosomal dominant, the risk of recurrence is 50%, and there is a 50% chance of having a normal child. Prenatal diagnosis was discussed, and mutation was identified, and it was done in the CVS, which was again negative for the mutation, and there was a birth of a normal baby. So once you draw the pedigree, when you take the family history, you do the molecular testing, and you counsel them properly, you can give such happy joy to such families who refuse to go further for reproductive decisions. Another case scenario which may be very rare, but still it can happen, is when two achondroplasics marry. This is common in, I think the stigma is more in less developed countries for such, because we don't have a very good support system for such kids or people. But if you see America, or where they have this whole Society of Little People of America, they on the contrary are against people who are doing prenatal for achondroplasia or any skeletal dysplasia. They are fighting for their rights, that there is nothing wrong with us. Why do you want to kill us? So there could be situation in which two achondroplasics marry, or two autosomal dominant skeletal dysplasia people want to marry because they know they will understand each other. And in such cases, there is a 25% chance that there could be homozygosity or the lethal form, and this can be explained to the couple. But again, even for them, there is a 25% chance that they can have a normal kid. So we can explain to them and give them a prenatal diagnosis for this. So you can see that autosomal dominant, again, you can have different scenarios based on the disease you are looking for. Now, coming to the second type of inheritance, it is autosomal recessive. As again, you can see from the figure itself, there is just one generation. So, and possibly siblings in the same generation are affected. So this is known as a horizontal transmission. parents are usually asymptomatic. Okay, and males and females again are equally affected, and consanguinity increases the risk of recessive disorder. This again I will explain in my next slide. The rarer the trait, the more likely that there would be a consanguinity present. For common disorders like thalassemia or metabolic disorders, which are anyways very common in the population, there may not be a consanguinity. It is just that the carrier rate is so high that the chance occurrence of two carriers marrying is high. So for autosomal recessive, you may or may not have a history of consanguinity. And the common autosomal recessive disorders we all know, majority of them, if you see, are metabolic disorders. These are hemoglobinopathies. So just like autosomal dominant, we have those exceptions and all. So we need to understand few concepts in autosomal recessive inheritance also. As I told, consanguinity is there, inbreeding is there, ethnicity is there. In such cases, the chances of they inheriting an allele from a common ancestor is high. So the chance of having autosomal recessive disorders increases, but not so much like they are going to have an autosomal recessive. It's not 100%. That risk may increase a little bit. Okay, and then there is a concept of pseudo dominance. Then there is concept of locus heterogeneity and allelic heterogeneity. So why we always ask for this consanguinity? As I explained, the degree of relationship, the chances of two matching genes among people who are related. So it depends on the number of meiosis between each degree of relationship. So when you have a first degree, like a parent or a child or brother or sister, the proportion of shared genes would be 1 and 2, right? So from the same parent, you are going to get the same proportion of genes. The risk of abnormality, if there is a first degree relationship, is as high as 50%. But when you go to a second degree, means the meiosis is increasing. Instead of 1/2, it is like 4 times. The genes will be divided. So in second degree marriages, where there is an uncle niece or an aunt nephew type of a marriage, or between cousins, it becomes the risk of abnormality is 5 to 10%. So as told that the risk is very high, it is 5 to 10% over and above the normal risk. Okay, and when they are double first cousins, just like I told that the fourth beyond the third, the proportion of shared genes will be even lesser. So the risk in abnormality is 3 to 5% over and above the risk in the general population. So hence, it is told that it is good to ask the history of consanguinity, but we should understand that most of the autosomal recessive disorders are due to chance mating of unrelated carriers, because the disease themselves are very common. And the chance that both parents are carriers of a disease increases if parents are related, because they will be inheriting one allele from the common ancestor. Okay, so this is what is the relationship between autosomal recessive and consanguinity. So there is a concept known as pseudo-dominance. So when a person who is affected with an autosomal recessive, because both the alleles are affected, is marrying a person who is a carrier, right? So in the next generation also there is a chance that one allele from the father and one allele from the mother is coming. So this child will be also affected. Here the unaffected allele has come and the affected from the mother has come. So this is a carrier. So in both generations, now this becomes a vertical transmission. So in both generations, there are people who are affected. So this shows something what is a autosomal dominant type of inheritance. So it is known as a pseudo-dominant. That an autosomal recessive condition is manifesting in 2 generations. Okay, so next is locus heterogeneity. So there are few terms which are using is allele, locus, heterozygous, homozygous. So I just want to give 2 examples. So there is certain disorders like deafness, retinitis pigmentosa, which are autosomal recessive, autosomal dominant. So they may be being affected by different set of genes. So the mutations are at different genes, but they result in the same phenotype, right? So this lady has two different genes, and this person also has a two different set of genes. So if you can see according to the inheritance, none of the children are affected, because here both the different alleles are getting segregated, right? So one abnormal from the mother, other abnormal from the father, but being two different genes or loci, they will not have the disease. So these are known as double heterozygotes. They will not be affected. The other type of condition is where the gene is same, so the locus is same, but the type of variation is different. And the most common is thalassemia. So thalassemia is a single gene, very small gene, just 3 exons, but it has more than 400 variations reported, right? So it will be very rare situation until unless they are from the same community structure or geographical region that they might be having the same variant. So this person has a 619 deletion. This person might have a splice site variant. So they will act as autosomal recessive, that the risk is 25%. But since the gene is same, the loci is same, they will be compound heterozygous as opposed to homozygous. Homozygous will be when both of them are having the same gene variation in the allele, and so the child will have the two alleles with the same variation, that is homozygous. But here the gene is same, but the variant is different, so the child will be compound heterozygous. So this is how they may be a carrier. So they will be carriers for two different mutations, and that 25% chance that there will be unaffected child. So in such condition, the risk of recurrence, again, whether they are compound heterozygous or homozygous, the risk would be 25%. So this person is a carrier, this person is a carrier, they both are normal. So if the normal allele will go, they will be normal. If the affected allele will go, they will be affected. So 25% is affected, 25% is normal, and 50% would be carriers like the parents. So they will be unaffected. So when we explain to them, we tell them that there is 75% chance of having a unaffected child and just 25% chance. So when they hear the higher number, okay, 75% chance of having an unaffected, they take the risk of having a baby and they go in for the reproductive decision. So now coming on to the third most common inheritance pattern, which is known as X-linked recessive inheritance. Many of you must be playing chess. I don't play, but you can know it's a knight's move. So it will go in an oblique manner. So here there will be no vertical or horizontal, but a transverse or an oblique transmission of the disorder. So the disorder, if you see, is expressed in males. As the name itself suggests, it is X-linked. So males will be having just one X chromosome. So male who is having the abnormal gene will be affected, while the female who is having it, because they have the normal X chromosome, they will be just carriers and not affected. So that we can say that the disease is expressed in males, but not usually in females. I have boldened this because I will explain that there could be some conditions in which even females will be affected. The other thing is affected male, all daughters will be carriers because he has just one X which he is going to give to the daughters. So all the daughters will be carriers, but he is not going to transfer it to his son. So there will be no male to male transmission. So this differentiates it from the autosomal recessive or autosomal dominant type of inheritance. And again, in this also, you may not have a family history because isolated cases may be due to new mutations or de novo mutations. And here this person or the male who is affected is called as hemizygous. So in autosomal dominant, the person who is affected is a heterozygous. In autosomal recessive condition, the person who has the disease is homozygous or compound heterozygous. And an X-linked recessive person will be hemizygous. Okay. So the most common X-linked recessive disorders which you must be seeing is usually for neurologists it is DMD or BMD. For pediatricians, it would be hemophilia A, B, or MPS type 2, which is again an X-linked disorder, or certain of the primary immunodeficiency disorders. The risk of recurrence, again, there are three scenarios which I would like to explain to you. One situation is when a carrier female. So here, this lady has an X which is abnormal, and she is marrying a normal male who has a normal X and Y. So the 50% risk of having a affected son, because the X from the mother is going to the son, the normal Y. So normal son 50%, affected son 50%, normal daughter 50%, and carrier daughter 50%. So we can say overall that 50% you are going to get a normal child if we don't want to go into the gender differentiation. So we can say that again in India, I am again talking about, because you know, gender discrimination is there. So they don't even want to have a carrier daughter, but we don't report it nor discuss it in a genetic counseling session that, you know, we can test for carriers and all. So we just say that we will test for whether the fetus is affected or not. We don't even, we can't even write it in the report that it is an affected male. All we say is that we have found a fetus which might be affected. We don't write the gender. So here 50% risk of affected son, 50% risk of a carrier daughter. Second situation is when the affected male is marrying a normal female. So here you can see that sons will be normal because the Y is going. So all his sons will be normal and all his daughters will be carriers. So this is easy to understand. And the third situation could be when an affected male is marrying a carrier female. Okay. So this is a situation where you can have a daughter who is affected. So this is very rare situation, and I will discuss in the next few slides that there could be situations in which an X-linked recessive disorder is being manifested in a female. Okay. So this is one condition in which we can have a homozygous female. So mother is a carrier and father is affected. So you are getting a homozygous female, so she will be affected. A situation in which the father is affected and mother is normal, even then you can have a homozygous female because the second X can have a de novo mutation. Okay. So the X which is coming from the mother, in spite of being normal, it can have a de novo mutation. So the girl can have a homozygous manifestation. So when you test the parents, the father will have the variant, the mother may not have the variant. Most common disorders again are G6PD. Initially it was that G6PD is X-linked recessive, but now we know it is X-linked dominant. X-linked recessive both are there, so females can also have G6PD. In such conditions, if it is a female who is homozygous, she will be more severely affected. The second situation in which a female can manifest is when there is a non-random lyolinization. So to have an equal dosage of genes, since a male has XY, so there is one X, one Y. In females, there will be two X. So to have an equal dosage of genes, one of the X goes for inactivation. Okay. So that is known as random lionization. It happens in early embryonic period, but nobody can predict which X will inactivate and which will remain. So it is a random lionization. But sometimes what happens is the normal X chromosome gets lionized. So it becomes inactivated. So the X chromosome which has the mutation will remain active. So this can lead to a disease even in a heterozygous female. So when you read literature, you will see that for X-linked recessive disorders, there may be females who can manifest, but definitely they will be milder. And again, their severity would depend on how much percentage of inactivation has taken place. So lionization, non-random lionization, how much percentage and which system or which organ has gone how much lionization, the severity will be accordingly milder or severe. So this is known as skewed X inactivation or non-random lionization, where an X-linked recessive heterozygous female can be manifesting. Two other more important points are a cytogenetic abnormality. Okay, so whenever there is monosomy X or Turner syndrome or an XYDSD, XYDSD means phenotypically you will see it is a female, but when you do the karyotype, it would be XY. So again, this will also have only one X chromosome. So when there is only one X chromosome and that X chromosome has a mutation, it's obvious that the disease will manifest. So whenever you find a female with an X-linked recessive disorder like DMD or hemophilia or Bruton's or something like that, it is always better to do a chromosomal analysis first, because lionization we cannot test, but chromosomal abnormalities we can test. And sometimes monosomy also, they may not have the typical manifestation of Turner syndrome. Okay, so we should always go in for a karyotype, one to rule out monosomy X, and second to rule out an X autosome translocation. So this is again an example. I would take 2 minutes. For me also, sometimes it becomes difficult, but I'll just tell in short that as I explained, there is non-random inactivation of the abnormal X. In X autosome translocation, what happens is that to save the autosome, because autosome is more important for gene dosage and for viability. So what happens is to protect the autosome, the other X chromosome is inactivated. So the derivative X will be inactivated, and because of that, the other chromosome which has the disorder will be higher, and then it can lead to manifestation. So either if it is an X autosome translocation or it is a monosomy X, the female can manifest with the disorder. So for this, we will have to do a chromosomal testing. So when we go for genetic counseling, it is that when you have 2 or more male members, it becomes easier. You know you are dealing with an X-linked inheritance, and you can consider the females to be obligate carriers. But when there is only one affected male in the family, there is no family history, the mother may or may not be a carrier. But we still need to consider again, as I told in autosomal dominant, that there could still be gonadal mosaicism. So a lady with one child with an X-linked recessive disorder has to be counseled for prenatal diagnosis so that they can test, irrespective of whether she's a carrier or not. If you test for carrier, she may come out to be negative, but we cannot test for gonadal mosaicism. So there is a chance that she might have a second child who will be affected. So these situations has to be kept in mind when we do a genetic counseling for X-linked recessive disorders. And the last 4th most important is X-linked dominant. So again, it looks like an autosomal dominant because every generation one person is affected. So it is going in a vertical manner. But again, since only one X chromosome is involved, the males usually are severely affected. They may be lethal also. The disorders in X-linked dominant in genes which are important for survival, so they may be lethal. And then you can have there are more females in the family who are being affected, but there are no males who are affected or males who are having early neonatal deaths or stillbirth or lethality. So again, as you can see, there will be, when you draw pedigree, there will be no male to male transmission. So this again confirms that we are dealing with the X-linked disorders. So all the daughters of an affected male and a normal female will be affected. So since this person has the abnormal X, and this being an X-linked dominant, so all his daughters will be affected. So 100% daughters, and the sons will be normal because the Y is normal and mother is normal. So this is how you explain an X-linked dominant inheritance. Most common disorders being hypophosphatemic rickets or FEX-teen, which is common, or known as vitamin D resistant rickets, or OTC deficiency, which is a urea cycle defect. Fragile X, I would still be a little skeptical in keeping it because it is a triple repeat disorder, its inheritance is sometimes considered to be, because it is on the X chromosome, it has to be X-linked, but its manifestations are in females also, and it is a triple repeat disorder, so there is anticipation also. So this is a little complex, and I think it will be covered in the next session. And the disorders which are lethal in males would be incontinentia pigmenti, or MECP2 related Rett syndrome, and chondrodysplasia punctata. So all these are again X-linked disorders which will be more seen in females who are surviving. Okay, we cannot miss out the Y. We have talked lots of autosomes and X-linked, but yes, Y is also important, not for many disorders, but yes, it is known as Holendrick inheritance. Just like we have mitochondrial inheritance for mitochondria, we have Holendrick inheritance, which is a gene on the Y chromosome, and it doesn't have any homologue on the X chromosome. So obviously only males will be affected, and affected males will transmit to their sons. So there is only male to male transmission. So this is the only inheritance, and there are not many disorders because there are not many significant genes on the Y chromosome which can have which can be passed on like this. So most common which we use in multiple choice question also is a hairy pinna, which is a Y-linked or a Holendrick inheritance pattern. And we can also have some sex influenced disorders and sex limited disorders. Okay, so these are some concepts when we are dealing with X-linked disorders which we should keep, because if we have congenital adrenal hyperplasia, it is a autosomal recessive disorder, but obviously female virilization only can happen. Virilization cannot happen in a male child. So because the female has organs which will virilize, you can have only sex limited disorders related to CH. Mitochondrial disorders I'm not touching, I'm just showing the pedigree here to compare between autosomal dominant, X-linked dominant. You can see all generations affected. Males and females are affected, right? But the only difference is that the female is transferring or transmitting the disorder to all the kids. Okay, so irrespective of the gender, male, female, a female, if she's affected, she'll transmit the disorder to all her kids because mitochondria is present only in the ovum. But if it is an affected male, none of his children will inherit the disease. So just to differentiate between the pedigrees, I have included this. Mitochondrial would be taken up in the next session with Dr. Meenakshi. So just summarizing all that we have talked till now is that once the pedigree is constructed and as many genotypes are possible, only then we are in a position to assess the risk and state the possibility. So sometimes, you know, a person just shares a picture of the child, or he will just talk to you, okay, this child has developmental delay in seizures. What is the risk of recurrence? It becomes very difficult for a genetic counselor or a genetist or even a clinician. So even clinicians need to take a detailed family history. They have to examine the child. They have to examine the parents. They have to call back any affected siblings. If affected siblings are not there, then at least the photographs, if they've expired, then any tests which have been done. Only after you compile this all history and examination findings, only then you can give them a risk and also give them the possibilities that what can be possible. So if it is an autosomal dominant, you have found the gene, you have understood it, you can have options of pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, you can have options of prenatal diagnosis, you can continue the pregnancy, you can have newborn screening. So there are many things which can only be possible once you have as much information you can derive from the family. So as much as background is possible is given, the risk of recurrence is quantified, and still, even after everything, there could be many misinterpretations because two people will take the same history in a different way. With some, the patient become more comfortable and will share more data. It has happened to us many times that the clinician will share some information, but then after some time, if a genetic counselor calls them back and they talk to them for a few minutes and hours, and they are ready to share the videos also, and the diagnosis changes a lot. So we have to emphasize that when we talk about risk of recurrence, it applies to each child, not to the number of children. Each child is at risk. Okay, so it is just like flipping a coin. You flip a coin 10 times, you flip a coin 100 times. You cannot predict how many times it will be heads and how many times it will tail. It just has two sides. Yet you cannot say, okay, I'm flipping it 10 times, so 5 times it will be head and 5 times it will be tail. It can be all 10 times it can be tail. It can be 1:9. So you have to explain to the parents that chance doesn't have memory. So if you have 4 kids, all kids can be affected. Unfortunately, they are falling in that 25% chance. You can have one child affected, rest kids normal. So these things come out only after you have a good pedigree, you know the mode of inheritance, and you tell the prognosis to the parents. So I can summarize that many factors can complicate the inheritance patterns. So parents are unaffected, there is no family history, but there is a new mutation sporadic, and you can have a very significant disorder in the family. You have to know about germline mosaicism in majority of the autosomal dominant, not majority, I won't say majority, but you can always go back to literature and search at which disorders for which empirical data is available for germline mosaicism. But I assure you that whether the risk is 1%, 25% or 50%, the option of doing a prenatal diagnosis can be offered to every family, because then they have a choice and they can take an informed consent to whether to have more kids or to do a prenatal, and even after prenatal they may or may not terminate. So that is again their own decision, but all this information should be given. Some disorders can have delayed age of onset. So if a child with Wilson disease is being examined by you and the child is just 5 years old, they may bring their sibling who is like 10 or 12 years old. You cannot say, no, this will come at 5 years only. He may present later with neurological symptoms rather than liver symptoms. So extended family member screening becomes very important for at least for the autosomal recessive disorder. So we don't know who is the carrier. We don't know who may present a little later. And then reduced penetrance and variable expressivity, pleiotropy, I have already told. And then genetic heterogeneity. Genetic heterogeneity is when one disorder has multiple genes involved. Okay. And then we know about imprinting, which will be discussed later on, and anticipation. So all these things can complicate the inheritance pattern. So risk of recurrence can also change accordingly. So that brings me to the end of the first part of the webinar. I'm not going to start the second part. This is just to keep you aware that the next session would be on non-traditional or non-Mendelian inheritance by Dr. Meenakshi. With that, I end this presentation, and I am ready to take questions. I can see around 24, 25 questions, and I'll just see which are more implicated or important for today's, related to today's topic, and I'll be taking that. Okay. Okay. Why single gene disorder is called so? Okay, a single gene disorder is because a single gene is involved. So in many of the conditions which follow the Mendelian modes of inheritance, it is usually a single gene which can give rise, any variation in that gene will give rise to a phenotype. Multi-gene would be multigenic or polygenic, which we call are the complex disorders, where there is multiple genes working together to give a phenotype. So those are like, if you say the complex disorders like hypertension or complex heart disease, there may not be just one gene, there may be multiple genes working. So when we talk about Mendelian inheritance, we are specifically talking about single gene disorders. So that is what we mean by a single gene disorder. Skip generation, is it applicable for phenotype expression? Yes, skip generation means the person has the mutation or the variation, but there will be no phenotypic expression. So yes, it is applicable for phenotype. So that is what is, it is not related on the mutation. Mutation or variation will be there, but it will not be expressed externally. Pleiotropy. Okay. Pleiotropy again is like multiple system involved due to single gene. Okay. You can also say like thalassemia. It is involving the hemopoietic system. So liver, spleen, but slowly the endocrine system is also getting involved, but that is due to single gene. Pleiotropy is like neurofibromatosis or tuberous sclerosis, where the gene is expressed in multiple systems. So there will be various transcripts of the same gene which are expressed at various levels in different part of the body. So depending on how much load is that on that system, that will be expressed more. So you have a child who can have Kaplan spot, who can have infantile spasms, who can have cardiac abnormality with abnormal MRI with tubers, and also have cardiac rhabdomyoma. So these are multiple system involvement in one child. But in the same family also, one child can just have rhabdomyoma, the other child can have tubers and severe epilepsy, and the mother can have Kaplan spot. So that is variable expressivity. Okay. So that is the difference between pleiotropy and variable expressivity. But one single disorder can have both. Okay, I think I have just explained. There was one more question between penetrance and expressivity. So it is the same. So penetrance is if there are two people and one of them is having the variant and he is expressing the gene, but the other person is having the same variant but not expressing. So in two people, the same genotype, one person, so the penetrance would be 50%. But if we extrapolate this to the whole disorder, then there would be multiple families which have been studied. So there may be thousands of affected people in that. In those families, they have seen that there could be instances where they can have the gene, but they will not manifest. So the penetrance of the disease will be low. So the expression will not be there. So that is absence of expression. While variable expressivity is, they will have the mutation, they will express it also, but the severity may be different, the system involvement may be different. So that is, expression is variable in the same family or in different people with the same genotype. Okay. I cannot understand this question. How frequent new mutation is among 4 varieties? Okay, I am not able to understand this question. If you can just email me, I will reply it accordingly. Is autism a genetic disorder? Yes. The difference is whether it is inherited genetic. You know, there are two different things. So autism is now coming up as in a big way. Yes, it is a genetic disorder, and it can also be, the risk of recurrence is also there. The only thing is that till now it has not been under the purview of single gene disorder. So autism is in the complex disorder category, where there can be more than one gene which can cause a phenotype. But again, autism could be syndromic, non-syndromic. So if you take Angelman syndrome or you take Rett syndrome, they have autism, but we know that they are single gene disorders because we know the gene. But if it is an isolated autism disorder, it can have environmental factors, it can have metabolic conditions, it can have genetics also. So chromosomal microdeletions and microduplications are coming up in a big way. Like the pickup rate is almost, if you do microarray, if you do whole exome, and if you do metabolic testing, Fragile X testing, if you do all the genetic tests, you can know that the pickup rate is 40%. So you can say that 40% of the autism cases could be genetic. For rest, either we have still not found the gene, or it could be environmental related. Okay. In many cases, there is new mutation. So how should we approach for genetic counseling? So I think I have covered this. If there is a new mutation or a de novo mutation, first of all, we have to diagnose it. So we know whether it is an autosomal dominant, it is X-linked recessive, autosomal recessive, because until and unless we don't diagnose the condition, we cannot search literature to know the mode of inheritance. Until and unless we don't know the mode of inheritance, we cannot give them the risk of recurrence. And we cannot even give them the prognosis. Because rather than knowing the risk of recurrence, for them, the prognosis is more important. Okay. So whenever there is a new mutation, we should approach them that this could be any of these inheritance patterns. So we will have to do a thorough investigation. Only after we know the mode of inheritance from the diagnosis, we will be able to tell you the risk in the sibling, the risk in the next child, and the risk in the offspring or extended family member. So new mutation can be autosomal dominant, autosomal recessive, X-linked dominant, X-linked recessive, or mitochondrial also. So the genetic counseling cannot be very easy in such cases. Have you find any case of X-linked dominant disorder in your practice life? Yes, we had a family of PEX gene, which is hypophosphatemic rickets. Since I'm working in a lab, we do get even incontinentia pigmenta we have diagnosed. So yes, X-linked dominant being very rare, we still do see them. And I have seen them. Incontinentia pigmenta, 2 or 3 patients are there in my follow-up. And even for hypophosphatemic rickets, we have a person who himself was affected. And probably this is the 3rd time he would come for the prenatal diagnosis. So he's coming regularly. So there is 2 or 3 families which are there in my practice. What is the specific difference between karyotype and chromosomal? Okay, this we will be taking in the part, I think, 3 of the webinar about, so you will know the difference between karyotyping and chromosomal. Chromosomal and karyotypic is almost same, but karyotype is the gold standard, old method, traditional method of doing chromosomal analysis. Newer methods have come out, and we will be discussing them in the next webinar. When a same disease have 3 different Mendelian expression, what is the determining factor which the disease gonna follow? Again, as I'm telling again and again, only after a genetic test, you can determine what pattern it is going to follow. Like I gave the example of retinitis pigmentosa. Until and unless you do the genetic studies, so for retinitis pigmentosa, there are more than 85, 90 genes. Okay, some of them are AD, some AR, some XLR, even mitochondrial pattern is also seen. So until and unless you do all efforts to have a final genetic testing report in front of you, you cannot predict how it is going to. So the prognosis cannot be given without that. And this is for new mutation. If there is a family history, and according to the family history, you are very clearly knowing that it is autosomal dominant, you can always say that it will follow the same pattern like the person in your family. Okay, so either you have a family history positive and you can predict the prognosis, or you do a genetic testing and you can predict the prognosis. In a pedigree, does a disease be AR in one generation and AD in next? This could be a very, very, very rare possibility. But yes, there are certain genes which have an AD and AR manifestations both. And like it depends, the AD manifestations may be adult onset later, and the AR may be earlier and more severe. So yes, it is possible that in the same pedigree or in the same family, you can have one person being AD with milder phenotype, but the offspring being AR with a severe phenotype. It could be a de novo variant, or the wife may be having a germline mosaicism something, and he can present as an autosomal recessive condition. So yes, it is possible. There are few genes which can have both manifestations. any role of environment, lots of role of environment, but will depend on which condition you are asking me. So if it is complex disorders or polygenic disorders, then yes, environment plays the role. And as I told, even in single gene disorders, sometimes an external trauma or external effect can make the disorder come earlier or late, like even in metabolic disorders. Right? What is the difference between mosaicism, somatic, gonadal, and primer? Okay, this is a totally a big thing. I will have to show it with drawings. I will try it in my next topic to cover this, chimera and mosaicism. Relation of birth defect with genetic disorder. Okay. So birth defects being congenital, they could be genetics, there could be teratogenic, which is environment, they could be a combination of both. So if you see a mother on a teratogenic drug like valproate, phenytoin, so that's why family history becomes important. You can have or a diabetes mother who is diabetic, then these, or SLE also. So mother is having a genetic disorder. She is having, she's on certain drugs. So the teratogenic effect in the child can be because of the disease itself and because of the drugs also. So there is a strong relationship between genetic disorder and birth defect. Okay. So environment, definitely for like cleft lip, cleft palate, there could be environmental factors. We all know the relationship between neural tube defects and folic acid, or right. So, but if you say specifically genetic disorders, then as I showed in my first slide, almost 50% of the neonatal deaths are due to congenital defects. And these are all genetic disorders. They could be single gene, they could be chromosomal, there could be even, complex disorders, which can present with a birth defect. To express good or bad genes. Shahida, I again cannot understand this question. Express good or bad genes. Okay. What could be the recurrent risk of thalassemia? Thalassemia is autosomal recessive. So the umbrella is that it is 25% risk of recurrence in the next child. Okay. So that is a blanket statement because it is an autosomal recessive disorder. So recurrent risk of affected is 25%. Dr. Sayyed, thank you for the nice, good words. Which numerical disorder is lethal? Numerical, again, I didn't get this term. Numerical or chromosomal or aneuploidy you are talking about, Dr. Ghosh? I think it is an aneuploidy, probably you are talking about. So again, this will be covered by Dr. Meenakshi. We have a session on aneuploidy. Frequency of new mutation. So that exactly for each and every I cannot tell you right now. It will depend on the disorders. There are more than 4,500 disorders in OMIM right now, 20,000 genes. So the frequency would be different for each and every disorder. Okay, what is codominant? That I think I already discussed. Codominant is like when in an autosomal dominant disorder, two different genotypes from the parents are both phenotypically expressed. So blood group. So blood group is probably the most common codominant disorders in humans, which I have expressed previously. Do you think neonatal screening should be undertaken as universal investigation for you as well as our country? A lot of debate is going on. Yes, slowly it is changing. We should try to make it universal, at least for the common disorders which are treatable if detected early. So as a time is going on and we are getting treatment options for majority of the disorders, the extended newborn screening can be added But as a consensus among geneticists, we all feel that there are 5 or 6 disorders for which, at least if we start universal screening, we can start early therapy and lot of morbidity and mortality can be decreased. So if you see, if you want my opinion, then yes, for congenital hypothyroidism, galactosemia, congenital adrenal hyperplasia, G6PD, thalassemia. For such disorders for which we have now good management and treatment options, if we do a newborn screening, then it will definitely help the family and it will decrease the morbidity and mortality. So for these disorders, I would suggest that we should have it. Is there any relationship of risk of having autistic child in parents with high IQ levels? I'm sorry, I'm not in the right person to talk about this. We can have a webinar on this again. I have a prepared webinar on autism, but I will definitely try looking at this question of having autistic child in parents with high IQ levels. Wow, that's an interesting topic. Okay, can I send genomic imprinting testing to? Yes, ma'am. Joseph can look into this. Joseph, this question from Dr. Famida, he needs to inquire about certain tests. Can you please help her with that?
Yeah, she can write, she can contact our provider in our partner in Bangladesh, Genetic Solutions Bangladesh, Mr. Rahman. The contact details are given on the slide. So she can either call him or write to him and he will take it up.
Okay, thank you. Okay, difference between karyotyping and chromosomal analysis, as I told, we'll be taking it up next time. Pseudo-dominance, will you please clarify? Okay, pseudo-dominance again is that in an autosomal recessive disorder, which is a horizontal mode of inheritance. So there would be like the parents are unaffected, and then you suddenly find one generation where 2 siblings, 3 siblings are affected. In contrast to that, you will find that every generation is having a person. So it will act like autosomal dominant pedigree. So the inheritance is not autosomal dominant, just the pedigree pattern will go towards being an autosomal dominant in an autosomal recessive type of condition. This can happen only if an affected person is marrying a carrier. So the chances of having a child who is affected will be 50% compared to having a affected child with 25%. Can we classify mitochondrial as dominant or recessive? None. Mitochondrial has its own inheritance. It has 100% risk of recurrence. So we cannot classify it as dominant or recessive. We will be discussing mitochondrial again in the next session. Okay, so I think I have covered all. No, still going on. Is any role of environment to express normal or affected genes? Yes, there is a role of environment. How much I cannot tell, but the genes, affected genes, environment will not like completely act on the gene, but because of environment, the gene can change its expressivity. Okay, so like cancer. Okay, I can take the example of cancer. It is a genetic disorder, but it is not inherited. So environment plays a more role. So if you're predisposed to cancer and you can avoid or prevent certain things which can increase the role of those oncogenes, then probably there will be less chance of having the disorder. I can explain it in the most simple way for cancer, but chromosomal breakage disorders. So if you have a radiation defect or you are going into a zones of high radiation, then yes, they can have an effect on the expressivity of the normal gene. Currently, I can think of only this answer to your question. If an AD patient marries an AR, so that's what I told you. AD patient marries an AR, it would depend. Obviously, it would be the same condition if you're talking about, or different conditions. So if there are 2 different conditions, then nothing. But if it is deafness, example I can take. So deafness can have autosomal recessive inheritance. So there would be a different set of genes, and autosomal dominant deafness will have different set of genes. So two people who are deaf, if they marry and one of them has AD-AR, there could be a condition known as digenic inheritance, digenic recessive or digenic, in which two totally different genes can act together. So depending on the disease in question, I will be better able to answer. So if you have a specific disorder in mind, you can mail us. I will write specifically for that. But if you may mean two different disorders, then there will be a different risk of recurrence. So two different disorders, there will be no risk of recurrence. Okay. So everybody is thanking me, and I thank you back for staying with me till so long. It's almost 9:30 here, and I'm really happy to answer major of the questions. Any more questions, you can write into us.
Yeah, your contact details have been shared, Dr. Sheetal. They can write in to our partner and he will forward it to us.
Okay.
Dr. Saha, would you like to close? Yeah, Dr. Sheetal, please go ahead.
No, I have finished. I'm just waiting for Dr. Saha if he needs to make some comments, lasting comments. Anybody of the guests?
Dr. Saha, any closing remarks, sir?
Yes, there will be a closing remarks by Professor Shohidullah. Before that, I like to make a thanks to Dr. Sheetal Sharda, actually, who is speaking for more than 1.5 hours. Actually, she brought the all complicated things into a simpler forms, and you can see the enthusiasm of our audience. We have 212 participants, and till now I can see 114 is visible. And you can also see the enthusiasm of our audience who have asked around 47 questions. So I think in future, our audience will be much benefited from our webinar series. May I request Professor Shohidullah sir to conclude, but before that, I like to make a thanks to the MedGenome India, Sheetal Sharda madam, then Genetic Solutions of Bangladesh, and Bangladesh Beximco Pharmaceuticals Bangladesh, those who were helping in various stages to make this webinar in existence. Now, may I request Professor Shohidullah sir to conclude this session with thanks.
Thank you, Professor Narayan Saha. Elegant presentation. Really, really great. Thanks to Sheetal Sharda.
Thank you,
for
sir.
your, yes, and fantastic. And then you just made it a storytelling. And you started with the ABC of genetic inheritance to a very elaborate explanation. And I am pretty sure that the participants are hugely being benefited. And you have seen that there are a lot of questions. I haven't seen such a huge number of questions, and you responded it so well. Thank you again for that. Let me say, someone of our colleague one day will become interested in this subject and will become a medical geneticist. That's
yes,
my expectation.
We are here to help them. We are starting an online genetic counseling course. I will keep you posted for that. So probably if anybody is interested, it could be a 6-month online course. So right. I'll keep you posted as soon as it starts. So if anybody wants to join that, it would be good.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank all our esteemed participants for being with us for such a long time. You made it interactive. Thanks for the questions. And finally, thanks MedGenome to make it happen, and Beximco. Thank you very much from my side.
I'm sorry for overshooting the time, but I was so engrossed in the talk.
No, it was really good, really good.
Thank you so much, sir.
Okay.
Bye.
So I think on behalf of MedGenome, I'd like to thank Dr. Sheetal for taking time off and giving us a presentation. And I would also like to thank Dr. Saha for organizing this webinar and providing us with this wonderful audience and this opportunity. And I'd also like to thank the dignitaries who graced our webinar with their presence and gave their insightful talk. As I mentioned before, if you have any questions or queries, you can get in touch with our partner, Genetic Solutions Bangladesh, and we will address them. And if you have any, if you need to know further, you can visit us at our website, www.medgenome.com. At the bottom left-hand corner, you can see it. And you can get more information on all our, tests and panels that are there: neurogenetics, cardio, chromosome-like microarrays, exome, NIPT, carrier, product of conception, etc. So with this, I'd like to conclude this webinar, and I will end the session now. So anything, Dr. Taha, with your permission, I'll end, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for taking time off and attending this. Thank you.